The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time to attend the second in our series of business intelligence webinars. So I'd just like to do some introductions. So firstly, on the call today is Emma Riley. Emma's our marketing manager and she has organised the event. Also, who will be preparing and giving the demonstration is Donald Wynn from Firelight, and my name is Gary Waylett and I'm the CEO of Eclipse. So firstly, I'd like to do some brief introductions. I know that we have a number of our existing clients on the call, as well as some new companies that we haven't previously met with. Once we've done the introductions, Donald will do a solution demonstration, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the demonstration. However, as we're going through the demonstration, if anyone has got any questions, if they can just type them into the GoToWebinar chat, and Emma will collate those questions, and then we will go through them at the end of the presentation. So firstly, just a very brief background on Eclipse. So we're an international company. We were established initially in 1987, and our goal is really to help organizations to streamline their accounting and finance processes. So what we try to do is to help automate manual processes and really streamline everything from the procurement side of a business right through to the financial close and everything in between. During this period, since 1987, we've worked with a lot of organizations spanning a lot of different countries, and the sizes of those organizations vary from small local domestic organizations to other organizations that are operating in multiple geographic locations. The solutions that we provide cover everything from accounting and financial management through to business intelligence and dashboards, which is what we're focusing on today, financial close management and the automation of all of those processes right through to spend control and e-procurement.
Okay, so as an introduction to Firelight Software International, we've been developing BI software for over 20 years. In more recent years, since 2007, we've come together and actually developing a new generation of software based around web services, allowing people to access their operational systems, whether they be payroll or finance systems or production or warehousing, basically anything that has an application database, and allowing them to access conceivably complex systems in a way that end users can build reports themselves. So it is very much around the idea of self-service reporting and empowering the end users, so actually giving them a capability so they can build their own reports and maintain their own reports without a reliance on an IT department. And I guess that's the key thing around the Firelight product, which is what I'll be talking about today. I'm a great one of actually getting in and showing the product. So hopefully you can actually see my screen, and I've got Excel opened. In the first webinar, we actually talked about the Query Builder, which is the main tool for actually building queries using Firelight, and I talked about a lot of the concepts around how it worked. I'm going to re-emphasize some of those as I go through, but this time I'm actually using Excel as the vehicle for reporting. So Firelight has an Excel add-in which plugs into Excel. It'll work with Office 2010 all the way up to Office 2019, which is the very latest release. It basically adds a ribbon into Excel and allows you to do intelligent formulas in Excel. So the formulas can actually go away and query underlying systems and bring data back into Excel. So it's not like a copy and paste, it's literally data being queried and returned by formulas. And that's quite a different sort of thing. And the big advantage of that is that if they're formulas, they can be driven by automatic recalculation. And that's the real advantage, that you can do things normally in Excel, and Firelight formulas will recalculate because they are formulas and they understand the whole concept of how formulas work in Excel. So to get the ball rolling, what I'll start off is I'll just build a formula, build a query, and actually create a formula and extract some data so you can actually get a feel for how it works, and then I'll explain some of the concepts around it. So I'm already logged in. So with Firelight, you know, it is a secured access, so you've got to have rights and roles and permissions and things like that, but I'm already currently logged in. And what I'm going to do is just open up what we call the query builder. And the query builder is our common interface for actually building queries. So whether it's the query builder on the desktop or in Excel or in the next product that I talk about in the next webinar, which will be Publisher, it's the same query builder that we use there to actually publish reports to the web. So the one common sort of interface. So in this case here, if I just go down here and select a table, I'll select any table. Okay, so the query builder is made up of a concept of you define where you're going to get your data out of. In this case here, I'm doing Dynamics GP. I'm going to take the data out of company 2, which is one of the standard demo companies for GP. And I've got a number of filters, and I've got a selection list. Now, the filters in the selection list are defined by the object that I've selected, which is the account transactions table. Now, if you've never dealt with GP, the account transactions table is the main ledger table in GP. The concept that I'm showing you here works exactly the same with any other product that we might sit Firelight over the top of. So even though it may be working over a payroll system or a procurement system or anything else, it's still the same user interface that people use to build queries. So to get the ball rolling, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a simple little query. And in this case here, I'll actually pick the account master table. And what I'm going to do is I've got the query builder open here, and I'm actually going to double click on the sheet behind it, and I'm going to cell reference my filters. So in this case here, I'm not going to use the account number, so I'm just going to select all accounts. And what I'm going to use is the account segment. I'm just going to do account segments 4,000 to 4,200. And I'm just going to return, let's say, for example, the account number, account description, account type, posting type, just a couple of simple columns. Now, I've built a simple query, and I'm not going into the details of the construction of the query, but I'm just going to say OK to that. It's going to come up and ask me, what do I want to call this query? And I'm going to say, yep, I'll take the default name, account master, and I'll hit OK. And it goes away and actually builds a query and extracts the data into Excel. And in the cell that I actually started from, it actually put a formula. So that is a Firelight formula, and it's referencing back to the underlying query. So if I actually double click on that formula, it'll open up the query builder. So I could actually go in here and I could take a column out, for example, or remove a column, hit OK. Yes, I want to rebuild the table, and it'll go away and re-extract the data as well. Okay, so the actual formulas are intrinsically linked to the queries, and by opening the formula and clicking on it, it brings up the query builder. You can change the queries and that data, or that presentation will change in Excel. The other interesting side effect is because they're formulas, they have cell referencing like any other formula you have in Excel. So if I was to actually change one of these values, so if I was to change that to 150 and hit OK, it actually goes away. It's recalculating that. Let me change it to something a little bit smaller. Let's say 100. There we go. Well, there's one account, 100. If I change it to 20, there we go. So it's using the standard automatic recalculation in Excel. It's respecting the fact that I've changed a filter value, and it's going away and re-querying that data and returning it into Excel. Now, this container here that you're actually looking at is actually a standard Excel table. So this is standard functionality in Excel, and I'm using the standard Excel design pane to change the color scheme. So that's just standard Excel functionality. So what we do is with these sort of queries, and we call them table formulas, they actually return the data into a table, and they're anchored in the sheet using a table formula. So literally the table formula is what's actually extracting that data. Okay. Now, for this example here, I'm actually doing what we call a detailed report. So a detailed report can actually bring out transaction lines. So if you wanted to have a list of all the purchase order lines in a purchase order, a detailed report is perfect for that. If you wanted to bring out all your account numbers or currency amounts over the last couple of months, so your daily currency rates, you could extract those into Excel and bring those out. And I guess it's important to understand that for what we're actually doing, we're not changing the native functionality in Excel. So we're adding capabilities to Excel, but everything else you would normally do in Excel carries on as it were. So it's just these intelligent formulas that allow you to extract information directly into Excel, and they're refreshable. Now, if we go on to the next sheet, because the first one was a very simple example, with this one, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pick up one of the queries that I authored in the previous webinar. So I actually created a query using the query builder, and I saved it to a file. And this time I'm actually going to open up that file. So this one here. So this is something I prepared earlier, as the old saying goes. And this time, because I haven't used it in Excel, but I want to use it into Excel, I can actually link the query to the underlying sheet. So I can say, okay, there is the cell where I want my company. So I've now got a cell reference for my company. And the period range, I can just double click, and I can now give it a period range. And if I hit OK, it comes up with the same dialogue as in, what do you want to call the query? And I'll just use the default name again. Goes away and extracts that data. Okay. So this query was really based around the idea of extracting the balances for a company's sales accounts. So let's say, for example, somebody said, can I know the total sales for this year or up to this month? And built the query, it extracts the account description, and returns the balance of the sales account into a table in Excel. And because it's in Excel, I could save this, I could email this to somebody, and they effectively get a table with the most up-to-date data in it. Now, because it's a sharper light formula, and because we have a direct link back to the underlying system, there's actually some interesting sort of concepts that we can introduce here. One of those is that you can see that table of data, but you can also go through and interrogate it further. So I can actually drill into that row, and let's say, for example, I'd like to see those sales figures by accounting period. And if I hit OK, it will actually bring up what we call Explorer. So in this case here, for period 1 and 2, there's only a balance in period 1. I can drill into that further. I can go down at a summary level, or I can go at a detailed level. So at a detailed level, I'm actually looking at the transaction lines. And let's say, for example, I can look at the transaction, the journal number, maybe the reference and the description. I hit OK, and it'll do another drill down, and I can actually see all the details that make up that amount. And you can see there, I'm still drilling down to the same amount. So it's 1.02 million, so 1.02 million. So at the same level, I'm drilling into it and analyzing it further. And this ability to drill into the formulas in Excel makes quite a powerful analytical sort of tool, because you can prototype a report, you can mock up a report very quickly, you can save the workbook and open it up and reuse it, but equally, whenever you have it open, you can actually look at a number and say, oh, that's a bit high, or that's a bit low this month, I wonder what's happening. And you can then drill into it immediately. So you don't have to build another ancillary report to reveal more information. You can literally drill straight into the queries. And that is a very important concept that you actually get with Firelight with an Excel add-in. The other thing that I just draw your attention to is the concept that underlies Firelight is web services. So querying an underlying system like GP, and there can be other systems that you can actually interrogate. But those systems and those data sets do not have to be in your local network. You can actually run this add-in and query data sets somewhere else in the world. So you could be sitting in London and you can keep querying somebody's installation of GP or another system elsewhere in the world, because we can use our web service to communicate securely. So you're not tied to a direct database connection, I think is the key point there. It's actually, we're using a web service to talk between where the database is and where the client sits. And it's secure, and the transmissions are compressed and encrypted. So it's a very secure and efficient way of actually doing remote reporting. Okay, so a table formula of that sort of ilk allows you to extract rows and columns of information. And there's a number of ways I could use this. I could pull out reports like aging reports. I could bring back balances of multiple accounts. I could do actual to budget comparisons and things like that over any number of different sort of systems, and allow it to bring it all as one single query. Now, the real efficiency of this is it's one single query returning a bulk of information. The slight downside of that is that if you're in Excel, Excel allows you a lot of flexibility of layout and things like that. And having a table kind of distorts that flexibility in some respect. So what we also have in the mix is a capability where we can actually do, I'll move that down to the cell and I will paste this. So we have what we call value formulas. Now, value formulas are self-contained queries in their own right. So they're like an intelligent sum formula or a sum-ifs formula, but they're actually, it's a query. It's just like a table formula, but it's a query for a single cell. So I'm going to create a single value formula to just return the account balance for that account for that period. So in this time, I've selected the value formula. I'm going to use the company 2, so I'm going to reference that. I'm going to select my table, so I'm going to use the account transactions table, though I could do any of these other tables, so I can pick any of those tables, but I'm specifically at the moment interested in the account transactions. I'm going to select my period over here on the side, and my from and to range, so a period from and to, and my account number, I'll select here on the side. It's the same period, the same account, that's fine. And I'll return an amount. And I'll hit OK, and it'll ask me what I want to call this query. And this time I'm actually going to give it a name. I'm going to call it actual. And I've got my balance of my account here. So that is the intersect of the company, those periods, and that account. So that is the balance of that account. So it's the same 1 million that we saw on the previous page. Now, because that is a formula, if I drag that formula down, it's going to go away and recalculate. So it's returning the balances for every one of those accounts. And you'll see here that it's actually, because the references were built with absolute and relative control, it's actually picking up the account number on the row. So by dragging it down, it's still retaining it's orientating to the row that I'm currently on. Now, in this case here, I've done the account. So I've done the actuals. So I'll call it the actuals. But if I wanted to bring out the budgets right next to it, I could just do exactly the same thing. I just pick the budget table and I can do a very quick actuals to budgets comparison. So again, I pick my company, but this time I'll actually pick the summary table that we've got, the budgets. It's the same idea with the period. So they're both using the same concept of the period, and the count number is going to be the same. Okay. But this time, because in GP you can have multiple budget books, I'll select budget number 1 and I will output my balance. And I'll remember to change it. So I don't want actuals, I actually want budgets. And I'll say okay. And I'll just call this budget. Okay. And that is the balance of the budget, and I drag it down. That's returning a balance. These are not returning a balance. Now, I know why, because I selected budget 1. And I know that there's only budget transactions for that account. If I was to go into this query and change it from budget 1 to budget 2, well, in fact, I think it's budget 3, budget 3, and I hit OK, that number is going to change. But if I actually recalculate this whole sheet, it'll come back with balances there. Now, an interesting little subtlety here is, and you may not have noticed, every one of these formulas has the name of the query stored in it. So it's actually going back to the seed query to define which query it's actually going to use. So when I click on this cell here, it uses the budget query. If I click on the one down here, it's using exactly the same budget query. So if I make a global change to that query, so if I change the budget book, every formula that's actually using that as the seed query will inherit that change. So it's with this, you can actually make global changes to a query, and all the formulas that use that seed query will inherit that change. So it gives you a lot of power and a lot of flexibility on how you actually build your reports, because you can go back and globally make changes if need be. Now, because it's Excel, you know, people say, well, how would I do a variance? And you say, well, how would you normally do a variance? You go from one and deduct the other. You've got a variance. Now, looking at these, you say, okay, well, they're sales accounts, they're negatives. I'd like them to appear as positives. You can go, okay, sure. So what we can do is we can actually reverse the sign. Just go in here and I will reverse the sign. So there's actually a specific setting just to reverse the sign. Do the same with that one. And reverse the sign. Okay. And if I drag this down, okay, and in fact, recalculate all of them again, and hey presto. And as you can see here, my actuals are lower than my budgets, therefore I'm getting negative numbers. Okay. So with this sort of capability with cell-based formulas, you've got a lot of flexibility with the layout. So you can actually insert rows in between. You can insert columns between. You can format it however you want, because it's just native Excel. We're not changing the way Excel works. So you can put subtotals in there and things like that. And you can layer it and color it and format it however you like. And this is one of the real powers of actually using Firelight, is giving you that cell-based control that goes back to an underlying system. You can do very rich formulas, but ultimately it's returning the balance of an account, or it could just as easily be the number of purchase orders that have been raised, or it could just as easily be the max number of sales you've done in the last 6 months of a specific product line. So they're all queries. It's just the calculation might not be a sum. It might be an average. It might be a min, or it might be a max. So that's all possible within the query builder as well. Now, because they're self-contained formulas, you don't lose the drill down capability. So even though you've got a self-contained formula there, I can actually still drill into that formula and slice it. So if I wanted to see based on, let's say, department, and I drill into it, okay, and that transaction is only made up of one department record. But I could then drill into it in more detail. So the same concept of drill down flows through, irrespective of whether I'm dealing with a table formula that I showed you before, or a value formula that we're actually looking at now. Now, one of the disadvantages of Excel is you can build structured reports, fixed structures, and you can build some very sophisticated structures around that. But it's not dynamic, because if you need to add a new account or add a new columns and things like that, it doesn't auto-magically sort of change all on its own. So one of the things that we've introduced with Sharpler is the ability to automate the dynamicness of a worksheet. So it can actually insert the rows or insert the columns or basically spin out the sheets as you're building a report. Now, to be able to comprehend that, let me show you this second sheet. Now, this is laid out similar to what I did before. The only difference is I've got a single row. So I've just got one row which is actually referencing multiple accounts, and I've got a single column that's referencing multiple periods. And these were going to be the filters. So I'm actually going to put a value formula in this cell here. So I'll go through the process that I did before, and I'll just create a value formula. And I'll use the transactions. Oh, okay. And period. Okay, period is actually on the column. Account number, I'm going to make that all, because I'm actually going to use the account segment as my filter. So my account segment is there. Now the interesting thing here is because I'm referencing a single cell, it's still recognizing that that is actually a range. So in Excel, we have single cell referencing. So you can have a single cell with multiple values in it, and you can treat it as a range or a list of values. In this case, it's a range. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to output my amount, and I'm just going to hit OK. Okay. So that formula there is the intersection of those values, and I've missed one because I actually wanted to add in a department filter as well. Just throw the department in there, pop it up there. Okay. Now, let's take for the scenario that somebody wants a report, but because they keep on adding accounts, they want it to be dynamic. So they want the rows to automatically expand based on the accounts that have been created. So what we've got in Excel is the ability to create what we call split formulas. So you can split the sheet, you can split the rows, and you can split the columns. So I'll start with a row. So by clicking on that formula, we've got a splitter wizard here. It reads the formula and says, oh, well, I can see that on the row, you could actually split this based on the account. Okay. And I'm going to put my split formula over here on the side. So what that does is if I actually then recalculate that sheet, goes away, it actually creates another sheet. And the other sheet is a mirror of this, but it's actually gone through and actually split this row into all the combinations of accounts which exist between 4100 and 4140. So it's generated those additional rows by looking at the underlying structure of the data model. Now I can do the same thing with the column. So in this case here, I'll just click on that and it says, okay, with the period, okay, and I'll put my period. So I could now split it based on the column, so it'll split out the columns. And while I'm here, what I can also do is I can actually split it based on the department. And I know only two departments really get used here. So I'll actually put a split formula. Now I'll close these because these are just custom task panes which help you get there. But as it stands, you've got a sheet that looks like that. If I recalculate that sheet, what it actually does, it blows away the split S sheet, the child sheet as we call it. So it removes that and it's generating separate sheets based on the different departments. It's also creating multiple columns based on period, and it's generating multiple rows going down. And there we go. So where we started from that little structure, basically a bare bones sort of structure, it's now created a slice of the information by sheet. It's also sliced that information by row and sliced it by column. And it's got a second sheet there as well. So the real power of the split capability in Excel is it's all driven by formulas. So again, it uses recalculation, but it allows you to create very dynamic styled reports, which you can structure in a parent sheet that becomes your template. And then you just recalculate that and it'll go away and spin out all the actual splits that it needs to do. So it's quite a novel sort of way of automating Excel without the need for VBA. So it's all driven based on these split formulas. And the split formulas can actually be modified using the standard formula or function wizard in Excel. So the arguments are not overly complicated. They're pretty straightforward. And we actually find that a lot of people create these formulas manually. So they don't even actually go in and use the splitter wizard. So it's basically a good place to actually get started, the wizard. But once people are comfortable with it, they quite often actually create these formulas themselves. Now, I've created this report and you might be looking at it and going, okay, well, you've got a spreadsheet and I want to send this off to somebody. Can they use those Firelight formulas? Well, if they've got Firelight installed and they've got the Excel add-in, they could. So they could refresh the sheet. If they don't have the Firelight formulas, they'll have these funny formulas appearing and they'll go, I wonder what this is. So what you can do is instead of actually, concealing the fact that there's actually another formula sitting in there, there is the capability from the Firelight Ribbon that you can actually go through and detach formulas. So you can actually go through and remove all the Firelight formulas out of a workbook before you ship it off to somebody else. And it retains all the standard Excel formulas. It just removes the Firelight formulas. So it's a nice way of packing up something you've developed. You may have used to actually extract the latest data. You then want to distribute to your audience. You detach all the Firelight formulas because maybe you know they don't use Firelight. And then you just send it off to them as an Excel workbook because you don't have to change the container. You could PDF it if you wanted to, but you don't have to because you can leave it as an Excel workbook as it stands. Okay, just as I catch my breath. So they're the main sort of things that I wanted to talk about in Excel. Just going back and just talking just ever so briefly about the query builder. Just a couple of things that I never really kind of touched on and it's worth mentioning. I guess one of the key things to understand is that what underlies Firelight is what we call a data model. So a data model describes the underlying system and provides a structure for the end user to actually drag fields out and build reports. The data model allows you to access complex information because the data model really defines all the relationships in the underlying system. So really, if you want to talk about the secret sauce, the data model is the secret sauce for Firelight. It allows people who may not have a good understanding of the underlying database to navigate and report out of complex systems in a simple way. Okay, thank you for your time. I think I'll hand over to Emma for questions.
Thank you, Donald. Just going to share my screen. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type a question in on your keypad or you can raise your hand. Thank you. Donald, a question has come in from Tim. He would like to know, how does Firelight licensing work?
Okay, so licensing around Firelight, you've got two main veins of the way it works. For the desktop client and the Excel add-in, the desktop client and the Excel add-in, they're what we call authors. So people who actually build content. So it may be content that they publish to the web, but effectively they're an author. So they are a full user and we have licenses based around a full user or an author license. In the web, because Firelight has a web front end, and the next seminar will actually be looking at that and reviewing its capabilities, you can have what we call read-only licenses or web licenses. So you have the full licenses on the desktop and you have the read-only or web licenses in the web. And they're the two main licensing concepts within the product. So, and your decision is just, do you go to full licenses or do you just need a web capability?
Okay, thank you. And he also would like to know, do you need dedicated servers to run Firelight?
If you're dealing with a very large user base, so let's say probably over 40 or 50 users, I would go to a dedicated server. And to be honest, nowadays a dedicated server is probably a virtualized server. But over 30 users concurrently, I would say probably a dedicated server. Less than that, you can host it on the database server or an application server, because the load for, you know, between 15, 20 to 25 people is generally not huge. So that's the ballpark that we normally list for.
Thanks. Another question has come in from Susan. She would like to know, is it possible to automate and schedule the process of detaching the formulae and distributing the reports in Excel?
Yes, yes. So one of the problems which I haven't touched on is one of the products we have with Firelight is a scheduler. So the scheduler can actually recalculate Excel workbooks, detach the formulas, and then have a distribution list and actually send the workbooks to a distribution list. So that's quite a good way of actually, you go ahead, maybe you still manually refresh your workbooks, you go through like an audit process or a verification process, and they say, right, I'm now happy with that, it's ready to be distributed. And you can actually execute scheduler tasks as effectively like a batch job and say, okay, I now want to run this, and it runs it and it detaches all the formulas, it may consolidate reports together, and then it distributes to the various people in the distribution list. So it allows you to overcome a lot of that repetitive sort of stuff that people do at an end of month basis, over and above what it natively is, a scheduler.
Thank you. She would also like to know, is it possible to consolidate reports across companies and then split them?
Yes, very much so. So one of the things I didn't cover on this webinar, but I did in the previous, is you can actually consolidate by companies in GP, and that's a fairly standard concept across any of the data models. So you can consolidate across them. You can run reports which basically return an aggregated value, but then you could actually run a report that then splits that information out so you get the separate companies again, or you could drill down into it, a single value, and look at the balances for each separate company.
And how long does it take to configure Firelight?
Configuration is generally very quick. In most situations, you're spending more time actually waiting to get access to the server, get passwords and things like that. To configure it takes about an hour or two. But yeah, it's a very simple tool to actually set up and get running.
Thank you, Donald. Doesn't look like there's any more questions at the moment. What I will do is I'll just take this opportunity to thank you, everyone who's taken the time out to attend the webinar this morning. I hope you found it useful. Our next webinar in the series will be taking place 2 weeks today, and that one will be focusing on accessing data in the cloud. So finally, I will leave our contact details up on the screen for you to get in touch if you do have any further questions. But in the meantime, thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you.